Welcome everybody, this is Mr. Storm, and I am going to take you through a couple of video games. We're going to make some video games using HTML and JavaScript, and a little bit of CSS as well, just to make them look nice and pretty. This series is mainly for my programming classes or my advanced web design classes, but this is really for anyone who understands the basics of JavaScript, understands HTML, and is looking for something more interesting, more fun to do than just to create some web pages. This whole series is based on information gained from this source here, Foundation Game Design with HTML and JavaScript, from Rex Vanderspoy. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. It's a great book. I definitely recommend you buy a copy for yourself and go through it. This video series is simply just kind of an extension of that. So if you already have the game, or if you already have the book, this will help you with that, with going through those the projects in that book. And if you don't have the book, that's fine. You can still follow these videos and learn what you need to learn. So the first thing we're going to do, the first game we are going to make, is a simple number guessing game. I want to make a game that will allow you to type in, allow your customer, your player, your user to type in a number, and the program will tell you, the website will tell you, tell them if they've guessed the number correctly. This is a very simple game, but it highlights some of the really important details and some of the really important concepts that we're going to need to understand to be able to make some more advanced and more interesting games. So let's go ahead and get started. First off, I'm using CodeWriter, which is free on the Microsoft App Store. It's not the most advanced compiler and debugger, but it's kind of like a more advanced version of Notepad. I like it for simple things. It's not super heavy as far as features go, but I like it. When I get into more complex things, I like to use NetBeans, which is this, but for simpler videos, this is a little bit complicated and messy, and I don't want to scare people away. So we're going to use CodeWriter. I'm going to create a new file in CodeWriter. I'm going to make it an HTML file, and I'm going to save this file as my file name right away, because I don't want to lose it. I don't want to make sure that my file gets saved. I'm going to make a new folder called number guessing. Number guessing. And I am going to pop this in there and number guess 1. We'll just call it that. So now I have a new file. It is written or it's created and ready to go. First thing, we want to make sure we're using the right doc type. It's an HTML5 document, so we want that doc type. And then underneath of it, and actually this is extra, we don't even really need the head and the body tags. We're going to make this as simple as possible. Let me make my font a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. Let's do that. There we go. Now you can see it. All right. So all we need here is really just the doc type, and then we can just do our page title, which if you remember from your HTML days, the page title is what goes up in here in the tab for your browser. So we're just going to give it a page title, number guessing game. Okay, perfect. And then right below it, we're going to give a paragraph element. Now in HTML, a paragraph element is an element that allows you to put text on the screen. In this case, however, we want the text to tell our user what we want them to do. So I am thinking of a number between 0 and 99. Pretty easy. So we've given our users some basic instructions on what we want them to do. Next, we want to allow our user to provide us with some input so we can it wouldn't be very fun if they weren't able to control the game in any way. So we're going to put an input element, which is a simple way for interacting with a web page, and we're going to give it the ID of input, and we are going to give it a type called text, which basically means we're going to make it a simple text box so they can enter some text into the input field. And then we're also going to do something special here called placeholder. What we want to do is we want to put some text in that text entry by default so that they have some kind of, we're giving them extra instructions on what to do. So now we have a paragraph element, we have some input, and then we want a button because we want some way for our user to be able to enter their guess. So it's just as simple as that. We create a button element. We write the word guess in there because this is the word that's going to be displayed on the button, and then we're done. So for this, we can actually save it, and we can run. Let's go to my desktop and let's pull up number guessing. We can actually run this, and we can see that our elements are there, right? So we're in a web page. This is a web page, and our paragraph element is there, and our text entry box is there, and our button is there. Now, it doesn't do anything yet because we haven't programmed it. We just built the, oh, and there's a little typo there. Anyway, we've just built the basic elements of the page, and now we want to add the logic to it. That's where JavaScript comes in. So we're going to do that now. Let me fix my thinking. There we go. Fix my typo. Now we want to do JavaScript. We want to start making this into a game. So we are going to create a script element, and the type is going to be of text JavaScript, just to tell our browser what language they should expect this programming to be in when the browser tries to compile this information. And so now anything that we put in between these script tags here is going to be logic that the browser is going to try to run. So we can use JavaScript, which is a fantastic web development language, to do some actual thinking about what the user has entered and what we want to output to them based on that information. So the first thing we want to do is our game requires a couple of variables. And variables are pretty easy to understand. Essentially what variables are they're kind of like little buckets, and those buckets hold different pieces of information. And we can give that bucket a name, and then we can put something inside that bucket. And then when we call that bucket by its name, whatever's inside that, we can pull it out and see what's in there. So, for example, the first variable we want is we want the mystery number. We want a number that our program is thinking of, right? Guess the number. And so the number that they're thinking of, we can just say it's 50 for now. This number right here, the user won't be able to see. This is the number they have to guess in order to win the game. And so we want that to be put into a variable so that later when we want to use this mystery number, all we have to do is call the variable instead of calling the mystery number. And you might be thinking, it's probably easier just to type 50 instead of mystery number. And you're correct. But we want this to be able to change throughout our program. If it's 50 all the time, it's going to be pretty easy, and people are going to get bored with your game. So we want the reason why we use variables is so they can change as the game goes forward. So the next thing we want is a variable called players guess. Guess. And we're going to set that at 0 at first. Now, this variable, we need this to be a variable because we don't know what the player is going to enter into the input. here. So we have no idea what number they're going to type. So we need to be able to take whatever number they type, put it into this variable, and compare it with what's in this variable. Okay, does that make sense? Now we're setting it 0 at first because we want to just put something in there. We will put their guess into this variable later. So we have our variable set up. Now we want to set up some input and output fields. What these are doing is this is going to allow us to interact with, this is going to allow our JavaScript to interact with our HTML in certain ways. So we're going to use the document query selector, and we're going to use the ID of input. Now it's okay if you don't understand what this means right away. We will talk about it, and I will try to explain it to the best of my ability. We'll have one for input, and we want one for output. Okay, so now if we take a look at our HTML up here again, we have a paragraph element with the ID of output, right? And if you remember your lessons on HTML, ID, well, lessons on CSS, ID is represented usually by an octothorpe or a hashtag, right? So down here we have hashtag input, which is essentially meaning this is the ID input. What this line of code is saying is that we're going to create a new variable called input, and what we're going to put into this variable called input is document.querySelector input. Document.querySelector is going to say, let's look at the document we're in. Let's find a selector, an HTML selector, that has the ID of input. Okay. Now it's going to look through the document. And it's going to go, oh, here's the ID of, here's the ID of input. I flip that around. So input is going to be on the input. But here's the ID of input. And so this is the query selector, or this is the selector that we want. So it's going to attach whatever is going on with this value to the input variable, right? So we have our input and we have an output. These are kind of like this is kind of like an input stream and an output stream. And we're going to do that plenty of times through the course of this series. So don't worry if it doesn't make a lot of sense right now. It will if you do it when you do it enough. All right. So the button. Now we want to make the button do something. Right now it's just a dead button. We click it, it doesn't do anything. Now we want to tell the button what to do using JavaScript. So we're going to create a new variable called button. And that variable is going to be tied to the button the same way we did these. So I'm just going to copy and paste. And instead of tying it to the ID of output, we're going to tie it to the button itself. Okay, so this is basically saying whenever we click on the button, I want JavaScript to recognize that this variable button is going to be that clickable button on my page. Now next what we want to do is we want to use this variable button, and we want to change the style of button, and we want to change the style of the cursor, specifically of the button, to pointer. Okay. Now what this is going to do is if we go back and look at our number guessing game the way it is now, whenever you hover over a button, you want your cursor to change to a pointer. In our previous version of this program, or of this web page, it doesn't. It stays that cursor. So we want to be able to change it into a pointer so the user knows they can click on that and it'll do something. So that's what this is doing. It's changing the style of the cursor for the button item, which is what we created up here. And next, we want to add an event listener to the button. And it's going to be a click event. And it's going to run run a function called clickHandler. All right. So this is kind of complicated, so bear with me on this one. So the button object, essentially, which is this guy we just created up here, is going to have an event listener on it. Basically, it's going to be waiting for a specific thing to happen. And when that specific thing happens, it's going to do something else, right? The specific thing it's waiting for is a click. It's waiting for a mouse click on that item itself, right? If we click anywhere else on the screen, it's not going to do anything. It's only on that button. And whenever we click, it's going to do what's called a click handler. It's going to run a click handler function. Now, we don't have that function yet, so we probably should create it, because if we were to save and run this now, everything would work, but we still wouldn't have a game. We'd be able to click the button, it would be looking for the click handler function, it wouldn't be there, and it would just ignore it. So let's create that click handler function. So there's my click handler function. And a function is essentially just a bunch of code that we want to be able to call just by its key name, by its function name. So the function name for this is clickHandler. Now, if we were to, if we didn't have this function option, we'd have to put all the code that we want to run right here in between these two commas, which would get really complicated, and no one wants to do that. This function, however, is pretty simple and easy, so we don't have to worry about it. But later, you're going to see some of these functions get pretty long. So this function, all it's going to do is whenever this click handler function is called, it's going to do something, and that something is it's going to call a different function called playGame. Now, technically, we could just call the playGame function on the button click, but it's kind of nice to have a little bit of a step between, because we can also add other things to this click handler that will allow things to happen before the game actually is played. And I don't think we're going to do anything with that today, but it's a good practice to get into. So let's make this playGame function. And with the playGame function, we want the actual game stuff to happen. So here, what we want is we want our game to take the value of the player's input, because they will have already typed it in, and they will have clicked the button, and then it runs the click handler function, which runs the playGame function, and in the playGame function, we should be able to grab the value of the item, or of the keys, the characters they've typed into the input. So we take that value and we compare it with the number, our mystery number. And if they match, we say, congratulations, you won the game. If they don't, we tell them you're either too low, too high, and we let them try again. So it sounds like this may be complicated, but I promise you, it's really not that bad. So let's do the first thing first. First, we need to load into the player's guess variable whatever their guess happens to be. So the player's guess is going to be parse int input.value. Okay. Now, this parse int basically just says grab me an integer. So we're only looking for numbers here and whole numbers. So if they type in a number, then we'll grab it. If they type in something that's not a number, we won't grab it and the game won't work, right? So we're looking for an integer. Here, we want it to go to the input variable, and we want it to be the value of the input, right? Now, technically, this isn't a variable anymore. It's now an object, but we want it to go to the input object, and we want it to be the value of the input object, okay? So we're basically just bringing in whatever their input is. Then we want to run some logic. So we want to say if the player's guess is greater than the mystery number, we are going to tell them that their guess was too high, right? Now, the way I said that is the way you'd normally say it. And luckily, it's kind of the way you write it out in JavaScript. So if player's guess is greater than mystery number, then we want to output dot InnerHTML. That's too high. Okay? And what that does is it basically compares player's guess against mystery number. And if those two things meet this criteria, if player's guess is higher than mystery number, then it does this. It sends something to the output variable, right? The output variable, which is tied to the paragraph. And it says InnerHTML, basically meaning make it some HTML. So make this HTML. And what it wants to make HTML is this right here. That's too high. Basically telling our player, hey, your number was too high. You guessed too high. So now we want to do what's called an else. Actually, we're going to do an else if. Okay. Now the way this works is, let's say the number that they guessed was 30. Now, remember, our mystery number is set to 50. So 30 is less than 50, which means this condition wouldn't run, right? This wouldn't actually go. So what happens then? Well, we want to say, well, if this doesn't happen, then else we will do something else, right? So it goes down to this else. It ignores this code here, goes down to the else, and there's another condition we're going to throw at it, which is player's guess is greater. Player's guess is less than the mystery number. So basically, okay, so your number wasn't higher than the mystery number. Let's see if it was lower than the mystery number. And if that happens, we want to, you guessed it, do an output.InnerHTML, and we want to tell them it's too low. Okay. Now, the last thing we want to do is we want to tell them basically the only other conditions that could possibly be true. If it's not less than, or if it's not greater than the mystery number, and it's not less than the mystery number, the only thing that could be true is that if it's exactly the same as the mystery number. So any other condition has to be that they've won the game. So all we're going to do, I'm going to copy and paste this too. All we have to do is do another else. We don't even have to put an if on it. We can just do another else, and we could just say, oh, you got it. Hooray, right? And that's it. I mean, we now have a game. So let's check it out. Let's try to play around with it and see what happens. I'm going to save my file, and then I'm going to open up my web browser, and I will refresh my page. So it says, I'm thinking of a number between 0 and 99. Well, let's try 24 and hit enter. That's too low. Okay, let's try 78. That's too high. Uh-oh. Maybe it's directly in the middle. Maybe it's 50. Yay, you got it, right? So that's easy. Now we have a little bit of interaction with our user, and we can actually have them do something, and we can use logic to tell them whether or not they did the right thing. Okay, so this was a very simple game, not even really a game because the number stays the same. In the next video, we will make this a little bit more complex and a little bit more interesting. But this was a good place to start. Okay, make sure you understand these concepts before you move on to the next video, because understanding this stuff is very, very important. Type this out, make changes to it, see if you can figure out how to make this a random number instead of just 50. Who knows? Maybe you can figure it out before the next video. But I will see you in the next one, and we will try to make this look even better than it does right now. Thanks for watching.